as to what we do and what the script is. So, boys, we massively appreciate you coming on. I'm pretty sure you're mad busy juggling all sorts at this moment in time, so we really, really, really appreciate it. Andy, just for a bit of a background for yourself, mate. Myself and Nick head up personal training for Pure Gym, so we kind of look after the business support and bring in kind of any external education, like Mark and like a few other companies, to really support the PTs to build and sustain businesses. So that's our role. Over the past kind of 4 or 5 weeks, we've been trying to really support them as much as we can with some of the best industry kind of experts to put in front of them, to give them tools, resources, their experience and knowledge to then go off and apply. So we've had like over 50 different webinars. We had Mark on about 2 weeks ago, which led to the conversation to get you on, because the conversation where we left it, Mark, was we started to talk about adapting programming and stuff like that, which we'll delve a little bit in bigger detail soon. I think just before we do that, Andy, do you just want to give everyone, we've got about 15, 16 building up here now of the PTs, and this will continue to build. Do you want to just give everyone a bit of a background about yourself, mate? And Mark, and you might as well do it again, pal.
Yep. All right. So my background is it really stems from the military. So I spent sort of 16 years in the military, and whilst I was in there, I pretty much had a hand in all the physical development across like the whole of the army. So, for example, I was a physical training instructor at a recruit establishment. So basically taking civilians into soldiers, and then from there I was then sort of like a PTI. And for the non-military, I'll try and sort of like keep it sort of like towards it, you'd understand. I was then like the pre-parachute selection staff, which is basically the selection process for airborne forces. So I was a member of that for, say, 3 years. So if you look at that in contrast, that's like two ends of the spectrum. From there, then I went on and developed into the rehabilitation world. So I then served at Headley Court, and then I ran the biggest rehab department outside of Headley Court, which was Army Training Centre, Pubbury. So effectively, I just dealt with a lot of training injuries, which I probably caused back then when I was a PTI. So this was karma catching me up. So I did that, and then I dealt a lot with amputees and stuff like that coming back from Afghan and Iraq and places like that. At the same time, I had my own sort of like PT business while I was in the military, and I did a group boot camp style stuff. So before British military fitness came along, I was already doing boot camps outside. I was working in sort of like semi-pro rugby teams, sort of like Tuesday, Thursdays nights. So I've always had my hand in a lot of different aspects and different levels of fitness. So I left the military, then I went to work down at a Special Forces support group as their rehab guy and strength conditioning guy as well. And at the same time, I was working with Celtic Crusaders when they were a Super League, developing the younger generation coming up into Super League itself. And at the same time, then I always had aspirations to actually open my own facility. So I pretty much made a big sort of like a big decision and thought, right, I'm going to stop doing pro sport. I'm going to stop doing the SFG stuff, and I'm going to open up my own facility. So I did that. I did that for like 2.5 years. It was fantastic. And then at that time, I then was asked to do some education for like coaches and stuff like that. And I thought, well, I think I've got enough credible experience to actually do that. So I started doing that at the training lab. And then I just had one of those moments where it's weird. I felt like I didn't have enough experience. And I thought, right, I'm going to stop the gym because I've done everything that I could actually do there. And then I literally sort of like went traveling. So I spent sort of like time in Russia. I spent time like around Europe with different like weightlifters, gymnasts, like 2 weeks in Klokov, at the Moscow weightlifting school. And then I ended up getting a job in Toulon down there with rugby. So I thought, well, that's a great opportunity. I took that, but at the same time, like I missed the UK. So effectively come back full circle. I'm back in the UK. I've got my own private facility, which is Combined Strength Training Lab. And at the minute I still mentor coaches via Combined Strength. So I run 3 or 4 different sort of like key workshops, which actually help coaches. And then I also run a successful online business called No Weak Links, which is online programming for like a whole range of people. So that's pretty much my experience. It's pretty mixed bag, and I'm quite happy to say that I'm competent across all levels. And what a lot of people say then is like you're a jack of all trades, a master of none. I think that's a really sort of like poor way to describe people in fitness. I'm actually genuinely really competent across a whole load of different levels. And I think when you understand the key principles, then you can apply that. So for example, if someone walks in through the gym, I think a trainer should be able to apply from principles and sort of like really serve a broad range of clients. And I think that goes against the grain of when you hear all these, how can I explain them, business entrepreneurs, when you say, oh, you've got a niche down.
Wankers, that's what they're called.
I know, mate. Like, I just think we need to remove people like that in the industry and come back to like a real coaching centered focus. And that's what I've always been about, in-person coaching, because that's what generally people need. And I think moving beyond this, I think what's going to be apparent is there's going to be a need for results and like quality. I know what I'm doing and I'm going to take you on a journey. And I don't think the industry as a whole, who's been led by the business entrepreneur side, have actually done a good job of that. You can call yourself a six-figure trainer, but can you actually maintain that as a business over a protracted period of time? And I guess I haven't seen a lot of six-figure trainers at the minute sort of like talk a good game. They're lost because they don't know the fundamentals. And here's why I think like Pure Gym, I think, are making a great move by doing stuff like this. Because like I know I've gone off my background, but I just want to sort of like encapsulate it all. But from standing from the outside in, everybody always talks down to Pure Gym saying it's a budget option, when in reality it's an option for people that can actually afford that level. So, but you've still got to give them a service that can actually go to across any level, rather than this person hasn't got money, therefore I don't really want to give them my time. And that's where the coaching entrepreneur bullshit actually has to be removed. And we need to actually come back into this coach-centered and getting results. And I think for me, that's why I've survived in the industry for a long time. And I dare say I'm not that well known, which I'm not really that bothered about, but I've got a pretty solid business.
It's normally a sign of a good coach, mate, if you're not that well known.
Yeah, but the thing is though with Anthony, it's like that is like I've got a business that's actually survived, and I can be quite cool and considerate at this moment in time, and I can actually serve a lot of coaches. But do you mean? But I'm not a bullshit six-figure entrepreneur sort of crap. So that's my experience in a nutshell.
Brilliant, mate. Bags of questions off the back of that, but I'll let Matt kind of touch on, just in case anyone missed your time with us a couple of weeks ago, mate. So just want to give us a bit of a brief intro again, mate.
Yes, mate. Yeah, I'll give you the short version of mine. So I was a PE teacher. So you go back to like 1999, so over 20 years ago, I started coaching sport when I was in sixth form, just coaching people to get better at stuff. That was at the time was like 4 to 16-year-old kids. Went to uni, fell into PE teaching, then into my level 2, my level 3. So gym instructing and personal training. Then sort of fortuitously fell into the realms of professional sport. So since probably 2007, so 13 years, I've worked on and off either under full-time contracts with Premier League football teams, rugby teams, or like little consultancy roles here, there and everywhere. I've been into a number of clubs to teach their S&C team things like how to use a kettlebell to help your footballers, not just here's how to use a kettlebell and I'm just going to throw loads of random exercises together. So then around 2013, so 6 or 7 years ago, was when I fell into like the inside of the fitness industry. So I started working for Jordan Fitness. So then I'm going to a lot of the trade shows, meeting guys like Andy, and becoming sort of building relationships with like the Body Powers, My Zones, and Pure Gyms and stuff like that. And so that's seen me teach courses now for probably the last 6 or 7 years. In the last 18 months, all of that sort of fell by the wayside, where I got to a point where I was just a little bit bored of the industry. Like when you're in it's almost at the front line of the industry, going and speaking at shows and stuff like that. As Andy alluded to, there's so much bullshit, and I get people have got stuff to sell. There's not a problem with that, but I just got bored with it. I'm quite stubborn. I'm very, very simple with the way I operate. So I just decided to set up my own facility in the middle of nowhere. There's not a house there's one house within a mile of my building. So I'm literally in arse end of nowhere. And so I just build up a facility to work with normal people. I've got a few elite athletes that come and see me. I've got handfuls of kind of good amateur sort of semi-pro athletes that take their training seriously. But 80-90% of what I do is just average, normal people who just want to get stronger. They don't want to feel like shit when they get up in the morning. They've got no end of problems. They've got a lack of trust of gyms and personal trainers because they've either dabbled with them in the past and it hasn't worked for them. So then they think personal training is a waste of money, or gyms are a waste of money, or they look from afar while all of these personal trainers are all doing the same thing that the entrepreneur wanker has told them to do, and they're just sort of like bombarded with the same old, and they just think, I don't like the look of that. It looks like it's too difficult for me because I've got a bad neck, hip, shoulder, or what have you. And so I kind of collect waifs and strays of people and give them the trust back that it doesn't have to be hard. I'm not going to make you puke up in a bucket on day one. We can pick all the low-hanging fruit. We can address the way you move, and we can do everything in first gear, and then we can just gradually progress through like a series of sensible steps, like Andy sort of alluded to, like developing like principles of working and just ticking all of these different boxes and turning them into healthier, fitter, stronger versions of themselves. And that's what I do now. Other than a little bit of stuff like this, I do a little bit of teaching, and we'll bring some courses back in due course. But my priority is just working with normal people.
Okay, brilliant, mate. Nick, I'm sure you've got loads of questions just off the back of the intros. Just to give you a bit of an overview, Andy, obviously Mark sits in our group that we have. So we have about 4,000 PTs in this group. A lot of them active PTs in Pure Gym. The majority, about 50% of our PT population are within the first year. That's just how commercial gyms work. Like you alluded to it yourself. It's a commercial gym of Pure Gym's kind of stature is that entry level into the industry. Like I had it when I was at Fitness First 16 years ago. It was that commercial gym that I stepped into and learned the trade from and so on. So a lot of them are brand new PTs who, rightly so, have listened to myself, Nick, the likes of Mark and other people in the group and said, when it comes to learning your trade and when it comes to getting better at your job and gaining experience, you have to get on the gym floor, work with day-to-day people, do as many sessions as possible, accept weaknesses, build on them over time and so on. But obviously overnight with what's happened, that got whipped away from them and they've had to switch on a bit of an online business overnight when probably they would have pushed that to the back burner and concentrated on the offline stuff, especially in the first year to 2 years. How have you dealt with this, mate, with all of your experience? So what have you done with your business to kind of switch something different on? I had a look on your website and started to have a look at the program that you offered, the bodyweight program and so on. So do you want to just go through the things that you've done in regards to your business and what you've had to do at this time?
I haven't had to make that many changes for the simple fact that I've been doing this a long time and I've had an online business for about sort of like 3.5 years.
Bro.
So I've had a long time to actually put that together. But what I will do is I will tell you what I've advised other coaches in combined strength and stuff like that. And the first thing you've got to establish, right, is you've basically got two sets of people that you serve. Is those that you've never met before in person, okay, and those that you've already had trained with you in person, and therefore you've got like an open dialogue, and they are two completely separate things. The key thing is though, and this is where like trainers need to, I would say, just relax a little bit, right, and then get smart. So what you've got to think of, and what I'd suggest that people do, right, is this: is start filming content as if you were actually coaching somebody. Do you know what I mean? Because this is where we've got to release ourselves from, oh, coaching needs to be in person. Of course it does, but at the same time, right, is if you think about what's the one thing that sometimes stops people going to a coach, it's fear of not being able to do something. Some people don't even walk through the gym door because it's a frightening place, but we can't really get that because we love training. But the person that doesn't, they will put every excuse under the sun to stop them walking through that gym door. So the key thing, what you've got to do then is you've got to establish, right, how can I make somebody feel completely safe in terms of what they're doing? And it's putting out like a really, really good content, like video that will actually serve them. So for example, I always tell my coaches to do a video, say like video the press up, right? But video the press up as in just the move itself with one coaching point. And that should take 30 seconds. Same video, expand on it and then do 3 coaching points, 60 seconds. And then you can do another highly detailed one that in basic, and this is how would you coach it in person? And that's the thing you can say. If you built like a very, very small catalog of those exercises, the staple ones, not burpee box jumps over a coffee table and all that crap, right? But if you actually said, right, what do people what's the fundamentals movement? And it's push, pull, squat, lunge. So if you did a press up, yep, and then you go, right, so if I do a normal press up, what's the progression of that push up and what's a regression? So there's 3 exercises. You don't have to worry about 4, 5, 6, or 7. You get them done because they're going to be the building blocks of what you do. And the beauty is, right, is if you think from a customer journey point of view, and if you take somebody from start to finish, this is something you'll actually be able to use when we go back to some sense of normality, whatever that normality is. But remember, for example, I've got no doubt when Pure Gym opens back up, there's going to be stipulations in place that say you've got to be 2 meters. So people will still have to train at home. People will still be scared to come to the gym. And you've got to say, hey, I'm a coach of Pure Gym. I understand what you're struggling with. I understand that sometimes you might not even like walking through that gym door, but here's the first step of you walking through that door, and it's training at home, and it's effective because I've trained this amount of people doing it. And all you have to do then is get those 3 videos. So if you look at that, then it's there's your press up one. Now from the rowing perspective, it's really, really simple. An isometric contraction from a row point of view. You can do straps in the door. You mean whatever ones that are in your repertoire. Then there's a regress squat. So there's a squat, the progression, the regression, the lunge, and then very, very simple core exercises. If you had those done really, really well, and that is not only the start of like dealing with right now, but that's how the industry should always been operating anyway. Because the way I would look at it is, what's the stumbling block, and how can I give an answer to that stumbling block? And so that's how I would transition at the minute to this online. Because if you try to create something that I've got right now, then I think it would be nigh and impossible to do that, because then you'd be competing against me, who's been sort of at 3 years. You need to just go back right down into the real basics, and the basics is what's missing. And I've got some things. I've got like a structure that people can actually use from a programming point of view that will help them. But that's what I've told my coaches to do to transition effectively. And then they've got that done. And what it's done is, here's the key things, right? It's actually given a focus of what to do, because they've just went, right, I now need to do this press up video, that rowing video, that squat, that lunge. I need to do the 3 versions. They feel great because they're actually doing something. They're positive. And then because it's done so well, it's like, shit, this is actually a pretty good product. And I'm actually going to be able to use this even beyond this like sort of disaster. They're the key things, what you want to be doing right now. And if you get that done, you'll feel confident. And when you actually do that, when you actually go back to talk to your clients, then it's much, much better. The other thing that I would say with that is remove the idea of like an hour's session, because it's far too much. Like, I've got 3 kids in the house at the minute. There's no way that I'm going to be training for an hour at home, because you're stripped away. So the key thing then is to go, right, so sessions are now, they've moved into like a half an hour block, but blocks is key, because what you've got to then think of is, like, if you do a block of 5 minutes, a block of 10 and a block of say 15, what that gives people is it gives people flexibility. And when you give people flexibility, you give them ownership. When you give them ownership, there's almost like a buy-in back and forth. Because the reality is, if I start a session and then suddenly Coleman pukes, I can just go, right, I'll stop that 5-minute session, go and deal with that. And it's like, and then if you give somebody an hour session with no time blocks, no phases, they'll go like, I've ruined that session, I'm going to do it tomorrow. But if you literally break it down into blocks, then you can say, hey, I've done block 1, I'll sort out the whatever's happening in the house, and I'll go and do block 2 and block 3 later. It just gives people that I can always sort of like move forward. So they're the key sort of like things that I would start doing.
That's brilliant. That, do you know what's even more great about that is you've kind of teed us up from where we left off with Mark, wasn't it? Really, we talked about, we got to the end of chatting for an hour or so, and we were talking about at that point programming, whether that be in the gym or at home, and how what they can do now is a building block to them moving back into the gym with, and for better words, a bigger, more kind of a bigger movement vocabulary than they had before before all of this, because they've had to reach into adaptations in every single movement possible. So what you've just touched on there with just a progression and a regression plus the exercise is a great place to start. Mark, where we left off, mate, was how you program in your gym and the systems that you use, and we use the word systems quite often in that one. And the guys give loads of good feedback off the back of that, regards to simplifying it as much as possible. How have you then carried on the past 2 weeks, mate? And I suppose we'll cross this over with Andy as well, into supporting your clients with the same type of principles and methods.
Yeah, so I've had 2 different approaches. One for my clients, and something completely different for non-clients who, as I'm sort of, A, I'm trying to help them, but B, I'm also trying to let everyone in my community know that if you now, off the back of this, if you develop an interest in health and fitness and looking after yourself, then I'm the guy to come to, 'cause I'm worth listening to. So with my current clients, the people I've been working with, some of them only for a few weeks, but most of them I've been working with for months, if not over a year. I've gone into the gym and I've just created like a directory of all the different variations and the exercises, like Andy sort of said. And it's something that I've been wanting to do for 5 or 6 years, but I didn't have time. I had time, I just never had time to find the time. Just too busy being busy. So it's been quite nice to actually get in there and just go through everything, like say, go knee dominant movements. Well, here's 35 exercises that I've filmed, just little 15-second clips, so they can just watch it on a loop if they want to, bilateral, unilateral, loaded, unloaded, and then stick that all in a Dropbox folder. That Dropbox folder has then got knee dominant, hip dominant, vertical push, horizontal push, vertical pull, horizontal pull, trunk / core / rotation, anti-rotation. And then I can just keep, every day I can go film 20, 15-second videos, crop them and edit them, and then within a couple of hours, drop it into the Dropbox folder so it refreshes, and they've got access to all of that. But underlying with that, within each of the folders, I do a sort of 10, 12-minute tutorial video teaching them what a vertical push is, the different progressions and regressions, how to understand kind of where you are along the spectrum. So they can almost start to learn to self-police it a little bit. I don't want to take myself out of it completely, but I want to empower them to actually understand why they're doing what they're doing. A lot of personal trainers sometimes get a bit worried because they think, well, if I tell all of my clients, if I teach them all of my secrets, they're not going to need me. And they will. They'll need you even more. When I sign people up, I try to sort of say, look, I want to teach you, because I live in a very small community and I've got a small facility. I can't have 1,000 members. I'm on about 75. I could get to 100 at a push, but I've got quite a small percentage of my community that I can actually work with. So I tell them that I need to teach them to be self-sufficient. So eventually they can flee the nest. They can go and join Pure Gym or the local leisure centre, maybe have a PT with me once a month, or they can come and get a 12-week program or what have you, and then someone else new can take their place. But what happens is, if you do a good enough job of teaching people to understand why and how you operate the way you do, they just buy into how effective you are for them and how useful you are for them, and you actually end up not being able to get rid of them. So sometimes I get a big problem I see with a lot of PTs is almost being scared of giving the clients too much information for the fear that they might end up losing them. So on the programming side, and again, as Andy said, I try and shrink everything right down. So I've got some, like another folder in my client Dropbox group that's a load of mobility exercises. They're then dropped into 3 or 4 different categories, depending on like beginner, intermediate, advanced, for want of better phrases. But then again, I try and say to them that just because you're fit and you're strong as fuck, that doesn't mean you only look at the advanced stuff, because the beginner mobility drills will actually be very useful for you just to keep yourself ticking over. There's like no egos. Nobody thinks they're too good for any different stage of the program, but they can just drop in. Let's say in the morning, the kids are all distracted watching Joe Wicks on TV or something. Then they can go and do 5, 6, 7 minutes of mobility work just to start their day off. And if later in the day they've got a little break in the day or something, I've got little 15-minute body weight workouts they can do that literally is just little 3 minutes, 1 minute off, 3 minutes on, 1 minute off. So they can drop it in throughout the day. They could probably do 3 or 4 different sessions per day, but not do any more than 40 minutes activity during that day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes complete sense.
I could keep going on and on and on, but I don't want to just bore you and take over completely. But just
I was just sat here, Mark, thinking, like, I never come off my course. I remember doing my course with Nazim like 15 years ago. And I remember never coming off that course equipped with, looking back, like a movement vocab and to be able to program effectively. And it was one of the better courses back then. Like, yeah. And that's probably got worse, if anything. It's not got any better of PTs coming off these kind of level 3 and so on. And I think what was spinning around in the back of my head then is I remember about 5-6 years into my PT career going on to 2 courses in the same week. One was with Stephen Tong, a guy who used to work for Faster Global Fitness with John Hardy and so on. And the other one was a guy called Mark Simpson, who was a GB strength conditioning coach. And it was 2 courses in a week. And I remember coming off that and then trying to understand and be able to apply the information I'd got from that level to a general population demographic in a fitness first gym, right? And I remember at that point thinking the first thing I need to do here is identify movement patterns and exercise selection. And when I did that, and I've talked about this in the past, when I did that, that was probably one of the biggest turning points in my career to get me noticed in, going back to what Andy said before, more of a niche kind of, I trained more corporate males who were ex-sports people who had a bad knee and bad shoulder and they stopped playing sport, that type of stuff. So that really helped me and probably turned my career around a little bit, and I took it more seriously. I could coach better and so on. Now, obviously, there's tons of people out there to help our PTs now to go and do that type of stuff. But just off the back of that, and obviously breaking this down, and I'll come to you first, Andy, on this, is what advice would you give to any PT with any experience, I suppose, in how to write an effective program, whether that's now or in the gym? What advice would you give them?
How to write an effective program?
Yeah, I know it's dependent on the person and it can vary, but what considerations would you support them to implement?
Well, okay, there's 2 sort of like key things you've got to get right first. You've got to establish quality and quantity. Now, the first thing is you cannot move beyond quality. So, for example, if someone can't do, let's take it right back down and let's stick with body weight, right? Because the reality is this is where I see most PTs get it wrong in commercial gyms. And I want to flip back. I actually worked in DW Fitness years ago, and I was in there within 2 weeks, I was fully booked. And for the simple reasons, because most PTs had people sat on machines and talking to them on treadmills, and I had people on the floor, warming up, doing stuff, and actually having a bit of a laugh as well, rather than just being like sat on a machine, just having a conversation. And for me, that sort of put me in an awkward position, because a lot of PTs were a bit disgruntled because I was in 2 weeks. I was like, look, you've got a choice. If you want to sit and like drink coffee all day and talk about how crap it is, then you do that. But I'm going to be training clients, And if I'm not training clients, I'm going to be walking around and I'm going to be, and here's another one that I think PTs are missing just before I go into it while it's still in my head, is if I walked up to you as a PT in Pure Gym and says, you're doing that wrong, here's a way to do it right, you would instantly dislike me because I've told you you're doing something wrong. Whereas what I used to walk up to people and say, hey, that's a really interesting way that you're doing that exercise. I've never seen that before. Can you tell me like how you actually got to that? Because that's an easy spin around, because then you're interested in that person. Because the reality is like, at the end of the day, it's still movement. Do you know what I mean? And we've got to be very sort of like clear on what's right and what's wrong. But that's an easy way to have a better conversation with somebody than saying you're doing that wrong and therefore you're doing that right. So coming back then to programming, you've got to get quality first. And this is where understanding, you must have like a timeline of exercises. So the key thing is of all the coaches on here, I think there's like 25 and there should be more. You've got to think about, right, is how long is your average client, right? And most people have got clients for like 1 or 2 years. So if you could go back and train that person again, what would you do differently? And you would actually expand the process. Now, the next question I often get from people is like, oh, well, what happens if they only are with me for like 12 weeks? It doesn't really matter, but your process is still the same, because then you perfect it over 12 weeks. If they stay with you for longer, then great. But whatever it is, you still need to have a process. So when you look at it, right, I've got a thing called Movement 6, which is basically like a whole series of movement patterns that are all on the sagittal plane. So they're really, really simple for people to actually do. So if someone can't do a squat, I am not going to program a squat. I'm not going to program a regress version of the squat. I'm going to look at what the issue is with that movement pattern. So therefore the quality of movement. And I'll come on to that in a second. Once I've got the quality, then I can get the quantity. And the quantity then is like you saying, right, I'm going to measure how many reps they can actually do. And this is what I'll come on to in terms of like the way I'm telling people to program at the minute. Once you've got those two things, you can then put a program together. But if you haven't got quality of movement, you're going to end up breaking someone. And this is what you've got to establish. So you've got quality and then you've got quantity. When you've got those two key factors, then you can write a training program. So let's say Julie can't do a squat because Julie's got really sort of like locked up hips because she sits around all day, and that's part of her job. And we need to get her hips moving. So then as a coach, then I've got to think, all right then, so at the start, I've got to program mobility, right? So I've got to groove in a movement pattern that's going to help with this client. Let's call her Sally, right? So I've got to go, right, Sally's got really dodgy hips, right? But at the same time, if someone's got dodgy hips, their ankles ain't going to move effectively, their knees, their spine, their shoulders, because they don't train. So therefore, we've got to actually look at the body as a whole. So I say, Sally, I'm going to give you an exercise for your ankles, your knees, your hips, your spine, and your shoulder. So that's a groove block. 2 minutes each is 10 minutes. So basically, every time Sally comes in, I work ankle, knees, hips, shoulders, and spine. And then she feels better because she's actually moving the whole body. And then beyond that, I go, right, Sally can't squat at the minute, but so what's the best exercise that I can actually improve that movement pattern, but then actually start to grain it in? So I can do like a reverse lunge, because a forward lunge, she probably won't have the stability and control to actually do that effectively. So therefore, my next one is I'm going to do a reverse lunge. It's going to increase the actual range. It's going to allow her to move and continue. So then if I look at that, right, I've got reverse lunge, first exercise ticked. And then from there, I can say, right, how many reverse lunges can Sally do in like 30 seconds, or until that technical competency breaks down? And this is the other one, is like, when people say like, I'm going to do press-ups and there's going to be 3 sets of 10. Well, what happens if they can't do 10? Where have you based that number off? And you actually have to get the numbers first. And so we understand exercise. So if you look at somebody, count their reps and say, right, stop there, Sally, that's great. And she does 8 reps. So you can then base that off the 8 repetitions. So all you've then got to do then is think, right, so you can now do a reverse lunge. What's the push option? So for example, if she can't do a press up, so what's the next best thing? So you've got 2 options then. You can either do a hands elevated press up, or you can say, right, what's the weakness in the actual, in the action? Is it, there's no there's the weakness in core, so she can't hold her trunk, but her arms are pretty strong. So you can say, all right, then we can then do flat dumbbell bench press if you're training in the gym, or because we're training at home, hands elevated press ups. But I know then when it comes to core, I need to then establish that integrity. So if I think I'm going to do a dead bug, because that's going to be really, really focused on the smaller muscles in the core, and then I'm going to flip her. So if I'm on dead bug, literally I'm on my back like that. So the next best thing I can do then is do a glute bridge, because I'm in the same position. So therefore I might as well do the top and bottom. Once I've done that and I've got that integrity, I can then flip her onto her hands and then do a straight arm plank hold, because I know that core exercise is gonna be effective for the next exercise up. And that's the sort of like the tenets that I want to actually put in there. So they're the key sort of like things that I would look from a programming point of view. And it's pretty much just standing back and looking, what can they do compared to what can they do and what can't they do and why? Because again, it's like the problem, if you look at professional sport and you try and look at, say, Tudor Bomper's manual periodization, and you try and put that into Sally, who trains twice a week, your head's just going to go, but you need to go is, how does Sally move? What does she need to do? And therefore, what do I need to program? And most of it is like really, really simple body weight. But then the other one is like, when you get back into the gym, you can do reverse lunges. And then what you could do is leg extension, leg curl. Do you know what I mean? So you can do a body weight, and then you can do leg extension, leg curl, body weight machines. They fit. There's nothing wrong with machines. There's nothing wrong with any sort of part of training. It's just integrating it slowly. But this comes right back down to, like, you've got to look at the quality of movement. So what can they do? So this is where, like, a coach has got to decide of what they judge a good movement. So if someone can do a really, really good body weight squat, then I'm pretty much happy. Do you know what I mean? That's almost like a tick in the box. But if they can't, I need to understand why. So if you then think about it, if I look back from a joint by joint approach all the way up, and then you look and say, right, what's the main problem of this person? Why can't they do it? And if you can establish that, and you can only do that by looking at the person. Do you know what I mean? And normally it's going to be ankles, hips, or in some part of their spine. It's going to be those three things from a mobility point of view. And once you actually start looking at it in that way, it becomes easier and easier and easier to actually establish.
Brilliant.
Mark, anything different from a programming approach for you of that kind of effectiveness? You touched on it last time, and I think it's on a really good note. So anything different there?
I was just scribbling some notes down a little bit as Andy was talking. There's a huge amount of crossover and similarities there. To summarise all of that, the things that I would say is, first of all, is that it doesn't always have to be about sets and reps. Yes, if you're training an Olympian and they've got to perform a specific skill on a specific day, then yes, you need to understand your periodization and how to program that. However, if I take, I mean, none of them are going to see this, but if you take, let's say, my 75 clients, I would say at least 80% of them have suffered or currently suffer with some form of depression, mental anxiety, suicidal tendencies. Like there's most people, especially when we come out of this, that's only going to get worse. Your average Joe on the street who spends his life watching Love Island and scrolling through Instagram to see how amazing everyone else's lives are, they're going to come out of this. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to have issues. So bear in mind, sometimes I'll just sort of say to the guy, how many do I do? I was like, don't know, just do as many as you can. Like I say, if they've learned to do a push-up, it doesn't have to be 3 sets of 10, like Andy said. Just do as many. Can you do 4? Fucking brilliant. That's better than last week. You only did 2. Then in the background of that, trying to work out what skills does that person need to be able to perform 10, 15, 20. What else do we need to build on? So sets and reps, and a lot of PTs get hung up on that, where you learn about periodization and is it 4 sets of 8 or 5 sets of 5, 3 sets of 10. There's a time and a place for it. And for most people, most of the time, it actually doesn't have to be that structured and that important. Another point, Andy sort of touched on it, the way I describe it, and I've talked about this with you guys before at Body Power, is about the difference between methods and principles. So if Andy churns out for an hour now and talks about how he runs his clients, and if I just wrote it all down and then just go, right, well, Andy does this, then he does this, then he does this, and then I go away and make all my people do it, well, chances are it'll work for some of them some of the time, but it probably won't work for all of them all of the time if I don't understand why they're doing what they're doing when they're supposed to be doing it. So methods is when you go on YouTube and you just download someone else's program, or you get it off the internet, or you copy it off their Facebook account, and then you just make your clients do it. That's fine. You're just throwing shit at a wall and hoping that a bit of it sticks. However, if you listen to Andy, you listen to me, and you go and listen to various other people, and then you start to go, hang on a minute, all of these guys have sort of said similar things. They've got knee dominant, hip dominant, there's pushing, there's pulling. Sets and reps doesn't matter at first. You've got to address the way they move, look at ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, thoracic, and stuff like that. If you then understand why I do what I do, and why Andy does what he does, and why Luke and Chris do what they do, and Phil Learney does it his way, like, there will be huge amounts of similarities between them, but it's just we then all develop our own way of doing it. So we've got our own sets of principles. So as we said with the push-up, if you can't do a push-up, well, can you do it elevated? If you can't do it elevated, maybe someone's wrists hurt because they've got some sort of they're at a laptop all day. Well, can you put them on their back and do a light chest press? Can you do a floor press so you reduce the range of movement? And at the other end of the spectrum, can you do it with your feet elevated? Can you do it with a plate on your back? Can you do it with a plyometric clap in there? And if you understand what your scale of progressions and regressions are for that horizontal push, then all you do is you screen the client, you see how good their movement is. If the movement at the shoulder and the strength in the trunk is good enough, then you see at what point of that spectrum they currently are at. They do what they can at that level. And then the next thing I've written down is they earn the right to progress to the next level. You don't just go in, if you're copying someone else's methods, you go, oh, fucking hell, look, that clap push-up with a 360 spin looks fun. Let's try that, Doris. Well, Doris probably can't do it because I'm just making her do something. She hasn't earned the right to progress up to that level. So again, it's another thing I have with my lot is you get a lot of people in gyms, they look at what other people do and they just try and copy what I go, oh, I want to do what those guys are doing. So a lot of my clients will come to me and they'll show me something on Instagram. And they go, oh, I want to be able to do this. So I say, okay, that's fine. But we're not just going to go up against the wall and try and do a handstand push-up because you've just seen someone doing it on Instagram. I'm going to teach you what physical skills your body needs to be able to perform that movement. Then in my directory of exercises, I've got my overhead push progressions and regressions. I'm going to assess you and see where you're at. You start here and then you understand that you just go through those methodical steps and you earn the right to do your handstand push-up if that's something you want to do. Does that kind of make sense?
Mate, 100%.
But I then don't just try to make all of my clients do a handstand push-up because I'm the handstand push-up guy, because then I'm jamming square pegs into round holes. Everyone has to do a back squat because someone once said the back squat's amazing. Well, you don't have to do that. I've got some people that have never done a back squat in their lives. They sit down, they do goblet squats, they do box squats and TRX squats, etc. But they don't have to do a certain thing just because it's what you want them to do, if that makes sense.
It's so relevant now. So relevant because a lot of the guys, I think one of the things the guys was really struggling with was the fact that, shit, I've got no equipment. How am I going to train people? And then almost trying to go to level 10, let's say, before even kind of considering level 1 because the fear of people getting bored or complacent because they are basic foundational movements, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's coming a full circle now because we're starting to hear a lot more people. Like we were just talking about yesterday, having the assessments to be able to kind of understand then how, like what you guys have just said, then what to put into that kind of session for the guys. So I think it's incredibly relevant for everybody is to have the confidence of what the basics of what you're trained in and what the basics principles of exercise is and movement is. Everything else is, let's be honest, it's fluffy, isn't it? It gets very...
It is. I mean, you've just touched on my final point there. The final thing I've got written down, and as I alluded to earlier, is that most people don't actually want to come and bust their balls in the gym. They want it to be easy because they don't want to be a sweaty mess. They don't want to be embarrassed that they can't do anything. They don't want to look like the fat slob who can't do what everyone else can do. They've got all of these hang-ups of stuff. They want stuff like, as I call it, like the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins. So if I can take somebody who's got all of these issues with personal training or exercise, and if I'm sharing videos all the time of all of these fancy things, that's going to make them less likely to want to come, because they think they think it's a fucking circus. They need to look at what you're doing. So this is touching on the point earlier I said, where if you're approaching people who don't have any current link to you, let's say you're just marketing for new business in your local community or the global community, they need to kind of understand that coming and working with you initially is going to be easy, it's going to be manageable, it's going to be constructive, and there's going to be this journey that I can go on because I can see what other people have done before me. Does that kind of make sense?
Huge.
Yeah, mate, 1,000,000% it makes sense. And it's the stuff that obviously the guys have been kind of concerned with. And Nick turning around then and saying they want to reach for level 10. We've seen that so much over the past few weeks. Andy, just on your kind of bodyweight programming and stuff, there's a similar question coming here. So I'll tell you what, I'll ask you the question because it relates to what I was going to ask you anyway. So Jordan's just asked, are there any resources either of you would suggest starting with learning the reasoning behind bodyweight movement to be able to coach it better? Currently learning off my partner's gymnastics coaching background, I think she's a bit sick of me. So I was going to come to you in regards to that repertoire of bodyweight programming that you've got and that you're offering right now. I know it's come off experience and knowledge, but any advice for the guys?
Yeah. See, this is, it's a question I get asked actually quite a lot. And what people have got to understand, right, is there's a difference between gymnastics, calisthenics, and bodyweight. Now, I see, it looks like I'm scratching your head, Mark. So for me then, I think if you're looking at gymnastics right now is an education point of view to train somebody at home, you're going to get lost very, very quickly. Because remember, gymnastics is essentially high level skill. Do you know what I mean? If you look at it like a muscle up is basically how a gymnast gets from the bottom to the top of the rings. Do you know what I mean? So that's like a high skill element. When you look at calisthenics, you're looking at front levers and handstands and all those things. That takes years, and you have to have a level of want. That has to sit high in your values level. And if you haven't got that value, or you haven't got that, you won't sort of see it through. Yeah. I don't want to say go and do my Aries plan because I don't like sort of plugging stuff like that. There just isn't any good bodyweight content out there. And therefore, me personally, I think I actually need to go and do something like that, because bodyweight for people in the gym is different from gymnastics and calisthenics. You just what you have to look at, right, is for the person who asked that, is see everything as a timeline. Right? I see everything like as a matrix version. So I want somebody to eventually bench press if they can. And the only reason being, because it just gives me like a lot longer sort of like a training sort of like timeline for that person. Not because I need to get them to bench 1.5% of their body weight. It's purely, it just gives me flexibility in programming. So, but I need to have a standard. Do you know what I mean? So like a good push-up will effectively lead into a really good a barbell bench press, right? So what I'd say to that is, like, for me is, have movement standards. And the easy way to get a movement standards is test all of your clients, not mine, not anybody else's, but test all of your clients, deal only with them. Because the difference is, and again, so I deal with like a lot of coaches, my movement standards for push-ups is 60 press-ups. So as a man, you have to be able to, so after a protracted period of time of training with me, I want to get you to 60 push-ups. Yep. And I'll tell you where that come from. So when I was in rehab, I had people for 12 weeks in rehab, and I used to work with their upper body. And at the end of that rehab, the average test was like 57, but I can't do that because it never looks good in the numbers. So I thought, right, 60, and I pushed up to there. And I've always kept that standard. So that's what guides me when I'm training, right? But you have to find your guide because, for example, if majority of your clients is based around somebody who's 60 years old, for example, then that 60 is going to be far too down the line. But if you say, right, I'm going to test all my clients, and the average person, of my clients can do 20 push-ups. So therefore, you've got your marker, you've got your line in the sand. And at the same time, you've got a minimum standard. So you can say, I actually want to try and improve it and get them to 25. So therefore, year on year, you're actually becoming a better coach because you've got a minimum set of values, you've got a minimum set of standards, and then you progress on from that. So they're the key things to actually get. So instead of looking at gymnastics and high-end calisthenics, you've got the basics, which we all know. There's a press, there's an inverted rule, which is really, you can do it off gymnastic rings, you can do it off TRX, or you can do it off a bar. Yep, and you just get the value for that. And I would always set that bar of like no more than 60 seconds if you want to give it a time value. And then you've got lunge, then you've got squat, and then from there, then you've got an overhead pressing element. But that doesn't have to be handstands unless someone specifically wants to go. That's all people need to understand at the minute and be happy to actually perfect that. Because as soon as you get into the realm of, oh, I want to go down and learn gymnastics, you literally get into, you're then coming up against high level gymnastics coaching and stuff like that, which you're just going to get lost. You're going to end up injuring somebody as well. Because if you think about it, like to do a handstand, you need like a certain level of shoulder flexion and wrist flexion as well. So, but the average person will just get injured doing that. I've injured myself, sort of chasing a freestand and handstand and push up, and injured my wrist. Took me back sort of 3 months. So unfortunately, there isn't a really good way of actually learning body weight that I think is appropriate for gyms, and that's something I'm probably going to have to look at doing, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I think that'll be a shout, especially at this time. I was just thinking, as you said it, and I think there's no shame in saying it, I was thinking in my head that for Jordan to maybe invest in your program, and because it's something that Mark touched on before, that you'll take a bit of every single person's methods and principles from the experience you've gathered over the years. Like I worked with some great coaches in a commercial gym and in a private gym, and I've took little bits of their methods and principles, and over the years, you just apply that to your own, like what Mark said before. And I think there's a lot to be said to be going into someone who you would trust from a level of programming and going and buying their program, sitting in it and applying some of that yourself, trialing and testing it. And something that I liked what you said then is have movement standards. So set your own movement standards. I think that's fucking brilliant, mate.
Anthony, sorry, mate.
It's all right.
Here's the key in the understanding why that's important, right? Is because nobody can ever call you out. And I think that's one of the fears that people have got in the industry. They go, oh, fucking hell, somebody asked me that. If I turn around and say that my standards are 30 and this is how I achieve it, and somebody goes, well, that's wrong, you can say, hey, dude, stop. I've got 30 clients at the minute, and I've actually took them from this point to that point, so therefore I must be doing something right. You may have a different way of doing it, but you don't have to shout out. And again, it's the problems with the industry. It's not my way is the better way. There's actually many ways. Like me and Mark work differently, but we ultimately achieve results. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Yeah. But the key thing is going back to that is like, who are my clients and what can they do and where are they? As soon as you get that, it's wicked, because then everybody's like, oh, I can do like 20 push-ups, and you say, hey, I want to get you to 25. Like I want to, and then from there, what you then start looking at is like, so for example, from a testing point of view, I'd say do press-ups, row, squat, a straight arm plank. And basically for me, so my marker is if someone really struggles with press-ups, for example, as in like hands on floor, and they can't do like a 2-minute straight arm plank, then I know that I'm going to have to do a regress version of that push-up, whichever that may be. But then I'm going to work on the core. So for example, I can get them to that core exercise throughout the day. And the thing is about like, if you continually groove something in small amounts, it's that consistency that adds up, because look, we effectively, we grow by accumulation, and that's where you can accumulate that. So there's some of the key things. And as soon as you get that, you'll feel really, really comfortable. The other thing as well, which is actually great, is, and from a body weight point of view, I test everybody every single session. And people just go, well, hold on a minute, you're going to get central nervous system fatigue and you're going to get this. And it's like, stop. is body weight training, and I'm testing to technical proficiency. Now, the key thing, especially at this time, is 1 minute you're up and next minute you're down. Like yesterday, my head was like, oh, do you know what I mean? It was like really, do you know what I mean? So I was pretty much flat like that. So if I'd followed a program that literally was set up here, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But the key thing is, if I then test and say, let's say I come in and do push-ups, I can only do 30 that day. I base my program off 30, and that's how I think that's one of the key things that people are missing. They write a program that's like 4 10s, 5 10s, 6 10s. We are not a mathematical equation. Do you know what I mean? We're humans and we evolve in very, very different ways. Do you know what I mean? And that's the beauty of it. Like, something affects us differently from everybody else. And once we actually understand that, so this is what I'd say for the people that are on, is test your clients. So for example, easy way to do it right is I test max push-ups from a technical point of view, or whatever your push variation is. From the programming, then I've got two options. I can then do 25. I normally do 25%, which is great, because what it does, it makes it really, really achievable. But then I can get quality reps every single time. And then all I do then is I then put a time block in that. So I say, right, you're going to do press-ups, a row, and a squat or a lunge, right? And you're going to test each one of those. Whatever your number is, then you do 25% of that testing number. And then what I want you to do, John, is I want you to go through as many rotations as you can in 5 minutes. Perfect reps, slow and controlled, seeing where you are. When somebody does that, it's easily achievable. They're doing quality reps. They're not going to burn themselves out. Do you know what I mean? And they're going to get to the end of the session and go, man, I feel amazing. And that's what I'm pretty much doing with my bodyweight training at the minute. Everybody finishes the session. If you look in my Instagram and the feedback I put up, it's pretty much, I feel amazing, I feel this, I feel that. It's because I'm not destroying them. I'm pretty much doing enough to give them that little bit that they release the endorphins, all the good things about quality of exercise. That's what I'm doing at the minute. And for me, that's sort of like quite key.
And Matt, you touched on that last week in a sense of right now, obviously, the situation's just madness and we've never been through it before. But this saying has always been with us for a long time, which has been meet the client where they're at. And that's kind of what Andy just said. Like, you test them every single day. And that might be a similar situation when you're in the gym and you're dealing with, like, my old kind of corporate market was like, might be one day where they've had stress, deadlines, they've not eaten for 10, 12 hours. It's understanding them of where they're at right then. So I think it's a really good point to kind of go into.
It comes, Anthony, but it comes from sort of a professional sport. So pro sport, you used to do a jump test. Do you know what I mean? So that would be indicative. Like, so when you're at your peak, you did a jump test. Do you know what I mean? So then you can correlate sort of like how you are. So if you're low in the jump test, it's like, well, clearly your central nervous system is fatigued. There's no point pushing you. You know what I mean? There's very, very easy ways to actually do it with normal clients. The beauty is as well is like, and because you're testing to technical proficiency, I guarantee, and I'll put my hand up like that, is your clients will literally increase like each on week. And they'll say, hey, Andy, I feel wicked. I actually got like one more push up. Do you know what I mean? So you're winning on the micro level every time, rather than saying like, right, I want you to do max test, everything you've got. I don't want everything you've got. I want to see you actually progress week on week. And again, that's sort of like where we need to get back from the industry point of view, is like technical competency and actually trusting that. Do you know what I mean? Trusting that if somebody only gets 5 push-ups, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to say, hey, man, you got 5 push-ups. It's like, that's wicked, you got 5. Now we're going to get to 6 and all the way up there, because I've got a plan that will actually take you to that sort of like that point.
I think you nailed it there when you said trust. They've got to be able to trust their, their training at the end of the day. And I think that's a big thing. I think a lot of I've been through it as well. You know, when you first few years, it's like you're trying to find your feet, and you almost. I think that's one of the issues with obviously the level 3s that are out there. It's just based on memory. That's all you do is memorizing information, and then when it comes to applying it, there's a bit of a gap there, which is where that kind of not lack of trust, but self-doubt comes in, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, that stuff that Andy's just explained and talked through is a fantastic example of how, in contrast to what Ant said earlier about going and doing a high-end S&C course, or let's say you read a high-end technical S&C book, and then you try and implement that with Derek, who's never done a squat before, and your head can be blown. However, the principles that Andy just said, I was going to chirp up and say it's exactly how things operate within elite sport. So the players will all be tested. You've got like a 5 meter, 40 meter sprint. You've got their vertical jump, various other tests. Every week or every couple of weeks, they can be retested. So you've always got a baseline. If a player pulls a hamstring or he has an injury, let's say he breaks a cheekbone, he's out for 3 months. But then when he comes back, you don't just go back in doing what he was doing before. He has to redo his tests. And if his tests are only at 60% of what they were in pre-season, he's not fit to play. So he has to do more work in those areas until he's ready to go again. So you've got a very high-end elite sport principle of baseline testing and retesting. They go steps further. Players wear GPS every day so you can track their recoveries and their sprints, measure their heart rate reserves. Or we had at Sheffield United, we used to have like an app where the players used to have to say how well did they sleep, how many hours did they sleep, have they had a litre of water already this morning, have they had breakfast. They just had to, by 9 a.m. they'd get fined if they hadn't ticked the boxes. But then the medical staff and the S&C team, before they arrive at the training ground, have already got the heads up as to whether one of those players needs to have really high intensity, or do we need to sort of rein it in slightly, rather than just tough shit, this is today's session, everyone has to do it, because that's all I've come up with, because I don't have the ingenuity, the creativity, or the understanding of how to manipulate the volume of load to suit that person at that time. Does that make sense? So it's a really good way of using some high-end principles on the gym floor with great effect.
Yeah, and do you know what, mate? I was just sat here thinking about PTs watching this. That's a really good tool, even to work from a general population point of view. Yes, don't get me wrong, people are busy as fuck. But if you just had 3 or 4 questions or non-negotiables you could do, or ask your clients before a session, before they even get to you, whether it's a WhatsApp message or whatever, that's going to be huge to set the scene for when you're in the session, when we're back in the gyms or in your virtual remote sessions now. That's brilliant. Is there another question, mate? Because I've seen one come through.
Yeah. This is from Sam. So he's put, sometimes I feel I tend to throw too many smaller movements in an attempt to prescribe the correctional and prehab work, i.e. hips, ankles, core. Is there anything that you would advise to prevent the over prescription of this, and tips on programming the correctional elements without overdoing it?
Some big words there, son.
Struggle.
Yeah. Do you want to take that one, Andy?
Yeah, easy. Right. So if you look at, like, I've got a combined strength training system, right? And basically it's founded on RAPS, which is warm up, range of movement, activation, and then the P is split into potentiate, patterns, play, or priority, and then the last one is skill. Now that's a lot. If you take that right down to current situation, it's basically sweat and groove, and that's what we have to consider, right? So sweat and groove is basically, and this is how I'd start to sort of like block movement, right? Sweat is a 5-minute block, groove is a 10-minute block every single session, and then move, the last part, is a 20-minute block. So when you go back in, right, is you're looking at doing this, you're looking at, like, over time, like, combine sweat and groove. So that's the idea. But remember, you've got to teach them first. So for example, I'm going to give you a couple of things. So from a sweat point of view is jogging on the spot, wide outs, spotty dogs. Now, done badly, they're not effective whatsoever. But when I'm doing it, and especially on my 30-minute sort of like Zoom things, is I'm looking at actually tidy up mechanics, just getting people to relax, like soft hands, elbows in line with knees, all the little things that you should understand from basic movement. Once you've got those in, so what I normally do is I normally combine them with, like, standing and breathe. So I do like 30 seconds of sprinting on the spot, which is basically a jog on the spot where we gradually want to get to a sprint. And the reason being is, like, if some people are training early in the morning, they don't want to wake the family up. So it's great for actually getting to quiet. So the key thing, what I'm trying to establish, right, is because this is what you need before you go into mobility. You need to be warm, but you need to be like focused on the breath. And I'm not going to turn all yogi into you and start like hugging trees and stuff like that. Just coming in, but you sweat. And then what I want to do is I want people to stand and just breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. The key thing about this, right, is people need to understand is like exercise is a stress and it's a way of managing long-term stress. Okay. But if you do it too much, it's going to have a negative impact. So when you start combining high intensity training long down the line, and then getting the client to actually control their breathing, you'll have somebody who's far more effective. And that's what you're looking for. So when you program in sweat and it's up to 5 minutes. So the first time you do it might be 30 seconds jogging on the spot, 30 seconds stand and breathe. And that would be 2 rounds. That's enough to get people used to it. And then you start adding in complexity. So if I remove sweat out of the equation and then I move into groove. Now groove is pretty much 2 minutes I'm going to spend on ankles, knees, hips, spine and shoulders. Now what do I do in those 2 minutes? And this is my thing. So ankle would be, we know how to work the ankle. If you think about it, we plantar flex, dorsiflex, we invert and evert, right? But we can keep the language. I want you to point your toes that way, toes this way, and I'm going to turn your feet in that way, like that, right? But the thing is, if you want sets and reps, because I know everybody does, it's no more than 6 repetitions. Now, the reason why it's no more than 6 reps, so if I've got my ankle like that, right? And I do this 1, 2, 3. If you ask me to do that on a video 20 times, you'd be like this. Yeah. A client will get bored of it. So the rule is no more than 6 reps. So if we go back into, so where did that come from? Has it got science behind it? No, it's just got loads of years of coaching. If someone does 6 reps, if someone does it badly, it's enough where I can say that's wicked. Now I want to make it 1% better. I want it to do this little tweak and then you do it again. There's a difference between saying, I want you to do 10 reps, stop there, that's shit. We need to go back and do that. There's 2 different ways of communicating. So 6 reps gives me enough that I can actually change the movement and enough that they can actually get a stimulus. So that's what I'm looking for. What it also does is it gives me that 2-minute window to actually do 1 round of 6 and then another round of 6 after I've improved it. Yep. And so that's what I'm looking for. And I do that all the way up the body. And this is what you've got to do. And again, what trainers will do is they'll go too complex too soon. And when you go too complex too soon, you lose the client and you lose yourself. Because where do you go from complex?
Yeah.
From an ankle point of view, the first thing that I get people to do is roll feet and roll the ankle like that. So basically roll with a ball on the floor, so the foot, and roll. That's it. Now, if you look to that program and you go, that's crap. Yeah, it might be crap for your level because you're really competent, but for Jane, who's never trained before, that's like, man, you've just invented fire. But I need to make sure that when they've done that and they're confident, they got to the next level. So it might be like, I want you to roll your foot. But remember the breathing we did in sweat? I want you to slow that down. Really push into that ball. When you get a tight spot, I want you to breathe out and relax. So that's the next level up. I haven't changed the exercise. I've changed what I'm doing within the exercise. Do you know what I mean? So I can make that foot roll more complex. I can make that ankle dorsiflexion. I want you to pulse forward for 2 or 3 pulses. Then I just want you to sit in that position. I want you to breathe out from that breathing we did in sweat. And that's how you've got one exercise and you've got a shitload of ways to actually do it rather than going, oh, they've done this exercise. What do I do now? My general rule of thumb, and I know I'm going off in sort of a tangent there, but sometimes that's where my brain works, is how do you progress an exercise? How? The way you do an exercise, the way I progress an exercise is I'd say, Anthony, do me 10 press-ups. And I don't talk. If you can do 10 press-ups without me coaching and you do it perfectly, we're now ready to move on to the next exercise, which is going to be feet elevated push-ups. And feet elevated push-ups are going to be different because they're going to stress the fingers differently, they're going to stress the wrist differently, and they're going to stress the anterior delts. That's the only change. And then what I might have to do is make you aware of that, and that's how you progress. And so that, for me, is the rule of progression. And it's not in that along with reps. So you've got to have how many reps do you do, and then can you do it without any coaching cues? So if I can write back to groove, so you've got sweat and you've got groove. So how do I start putting them together? So let's say after 4 weeks, you've separated, you've been jogging on the spot and you've been breathing, and then you've been doing ankle circles. Then literally, I just bring them together. And I say, Anthony, what I want you to do now is I want you to jog on the spot. And then when you stand and breathe, I want you to stand on one leg and I want you to circle the ankles. 6 rotations one way, 6 rotations the other way. Then I want you to do wide outs. So I want you to work frontal plane like that. I'm using big words because you're trainers, aren't you? Yeah. I've got to show that I know what I'm doing right. So then you do wide outs because you're going to stress the ankle in a different way. And then I'm going to come in. I want you to do like knee circles, no more than 6 reps, because that's the magic. I'm going to 6 one way, 6 the other way, and I keep on going all the way up the body. Now that is putting in little tiny micro changes that are effective over time, rather than trying to give somebody like a Kelly Starrett, I'm going to stick 20 bands on, do my shoulder and start moving around like that. And it's like, where'd you go from there? You do that every single time. But this is the art, is when you actually put them together. And most people start panicking, going, oh shit, they need to change it. They need to change it. They don't. Remember, like, our job is consistency, but giving them a different way to do it. So I consistently want to work the ankle joint, but I want to do it in a different way. So I can jog in a spot. I can do wide outs. I can do spotty dogs. Do you know what I mean? I can do crawls. There's so many things we can do in that warm, that sweat phase. Do you know what I mean? You can get so creative. And I think that's what I want coaches and trainers to remain thinkers and not followers. That's one of my sort of principles by the time coaches. I don't want you to just follow my idea. I want you to remain a thinker. So you can take what I've shown you and you say, Andy, I remember you told me about that sweat. Here's what I do. And I go, that's wicked. I might like take that one little bit and bring it back into mine. But it shows that you've actually been thinking about, well, hold on a minute. If I need to get somebody warm, what else can I do? Do you know what I mean? I can then do skipping. I can do pretend skipping. I can do whatever you want. I can run around the garden with the kids, can be my sweat. So I can run around the garden with the kids. I can then stand and I can do my ankle circles. And I can even get the kids to do it. So there are 2 ways. So a 5-minute sweat block, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds of breathing. But that breathing's effective for the long term. Then I do a 10-minute groove block, not 12, not 8, 10. And that's because the discipline of training comes in. And then what it does is it keeps you tight. 2 minutes ankles, 2 minutes on the knee, 2 minutes on the hip, 2 minutes on the thing. And then when you keep it simple enough, then you'll have a massive, massive expansion of exercise. So for example, one way that I teach the Jefferson curl. So everybody understands Jefferson curl. You stand and you basically flex and extend. I do mine in a seated position. So mine's a seated Jefferson. Then I do it in a high kneeling position. Then I do a 4-point version. Then I do a standing version. Then a butt against the wall. Do you know what I mean? So that is literally like 12 weeks of work all the way through, because I've got an understanding of where I'm going to start and then where I'm going to get into. And that's built into grooves. So when I come on the spine, you might sit in a chair and go, hey, we're going to do spine, then chin tuck, shoulder roll, and then you're going to touch your hands to the floor and come back up. 2 minutes, done. And it's really, really simple. So that's how I would start integrating that. And if you do that, you'll become far more effective than trying to just hit everybody with this mega complex mobility sort of like exercise. If that answers your question.
Yeah, mate, that was brilliant. Mark, anything that you'd add to that, mate?
Mark was taking down loads of notes there.
I was as well. I was like, trying to look at the screen.
I was just writing my afternoon.
Thinking, I'm going to have these quotes and I'm going to claim them mine.
No, I was just getting the copyright for Mark Laws's Sweat, Groove and Move.
You can have it, mate.
God, what more can be added? What was the original question?
1 second.
How do you integrate? It's the mobility idea, Mark. How do you integrate mobility?
Was it about sort of without doing too much?
So like sometimes it's
on one hand, when you're looking at stuff like prehab drills, yes, you can always have too much of anything, but I think if you're doing prehab stuff and what I would do is, if you feel like you're doing too much of it and it's eating into the session, over time, teach the client to understand what it is you require them to be doing, so they can maybe do it as a bit of homework and they do it before. Yeah. So I did a group class at 9 o'clock this morning. I've got a lad who lives up in Merseyside. So he's 250 miles away from me. And we've had a bit of time on Zoom, 10, 15 minutes, where I've gone through some mobility and some drills that he can do to work on his areas of weakness. And then when I log on at 9 o'clock to do the Zoom class, he's in his garden just finishing off his 8 to 10 minute little movement and mobility warm up, ready to then join in the class. So yes, the class has got its little generic warm up for all of the people, but he's got his specific stuff that I've spent time teaching him how to do it correctly, not to go overkill. Don't go and do an hour 3 times a day, but just do 10 minutes before you come on to my session or before you go to a run. And he then has that ingrained in his system, so it doesn't have to eat into too much of my session with him. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So then I can work on the constructive. So I've ticked that box. I've taught him that. If he ignores me, yes, we've got that accountability. I have to make sure that he's doing it. And that's where all of like your communication skills and stuff like that, and just checking up on people, that comes in, which is probably a story for another day. But then when I get to my finite amount of time that I spend with him doing a session, I can work on the specific things we need to do in that session, rather than losing 40% of the session just to stand and watch him doing his bird dogs and stuff like that.
Okay. I think, Mark, what you said something there that I think is quite key is that if you give a client a series of exercises, let's say, for example, what I went through is this period of, I'd say, like, I identified from the assessment that your ankle is the biggest limiting factor. But the reality is it was my limiting factor put on them. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Because it wasn't a problem for them. So outside of the training sessions, it wasn't a problem for them. So I'd say, hey, look, I want you to do this ankle drill because that's going to help. And they'd be like, yeah, done. What you've got to do is, and again, I don't give clients homework anymore for the simple reason I had a client before saying, I don't like homework, because it was a mindset from school. So this is where you've got to like then listen to them and say, here's a complex or a sequence that I'll put together for you. The key thing is to get them to talk about what their issues are. So I say, oh, how's the body feeling? And if they continually say, oh man, my shoulders are really sort of like sore, or really stiff, or my T-spine or my ankle, whatever it is, as soon as you've got that, that's the dialogue. Is, look, I want to show you like 2 of these exercises that I want you to do. And it's like, and this is where it's like giving them the right exercise that's effective for them, because they've told you the issue. And then if you can make that effective, they'll be like, oh man, my shoulder feels amazing. Well, hey, John, you can always do that again whenever you want. And you know what I mean? So from a coaching point of view, and I understand that we're in a different sort of scenario, I'm always trying to look at, I'm waiting for the client to ask the question. Because there's a bit like there's what most people get it wrong is they hit everybody with a PDF and 20,000 videos and they're like, oh, what do I do then? They need to come to me with a question. And it's the same with like nutrition and stuff like that. I don't give anybody nutrition advice until they ask for it. And people say, well, why don't you give it from a trainer? Because if they don't ask for it, they won't take the information on. It'll just be another thing that they throw behind them and get on with their day. It's the same with this movement stuff. This is where you've got to let them come to you with the issue, and then so they come to you with a problem, you get the solution. But if you give the solution before they come to you, it'll never work. You'll be then stop going, fuck me, pardon my, why aren't they doing that? They're not doing it because it's not a big problem to them outside of the gym session. But if it is, the shoulder's starting to hurt them, then they'll take that on board. And that's the difference between not creating too much work for yourself as well. And this is why I always go back into, if you do groove and you do a good job and you make that, we do groove, not groove, and it's part of reps. I've got CS10, which is combined strength 10, working from ankles all the way to wrists. We do that with clients every single session because we don't move enough. We don't move the ankle. We don't articulate that joint through its full range every single day. So therefore, when we think about it, is the curve in fitness, the swing in fitness is going to do this. Is most people in fitness fucked it up by saying, oh, it's all about six packs and looking good. Who right now is worried about a six pack? Most people right now, if you look at like the doctrine coming out from the medical journals, and it's talking about like the health of and longevity of clients who are actually surviving corona, it's going to swing back into health and longevity. And this is where people go, healthy is being able to move freely without pain. That way you can go for a walk. It's making, and then when you can do that, and if you look at the effects of NEAT and being able to do more because you feel good, then you've got a win-win. Do you know what I mean? So all this six-pack brigade and stuff like that, they're going to swing, they're going to be gone. And this is where health and wellness, thankfully, by some of the coaches that have actually been preaching it for a long time, and not only preaching but practicing it for a long time, are going to come in and going to crush it, because people will want health. They'll want to move better. They want to feel better. They won't give a fuck about a six-pack. I mean, but they'll want that because they want to avoid disease. Because everybody, if you look at, we've been bombarded right now with disease and death and fear. And this is where, from a coach right now, I'd be like, I know how to de-stress. I know how to make you move better. I know how to make you more healthy. I know how to make you sleep better. All these little things. I mean, and from the mental health point of view, right? You don't have to be a psychiatrist, but we know that when you exercise, you feel great. And that's the mental health part. That's the part, that's the loop that keeps people going. You don't have to turn around and become a life coach. Do you know what I mean? Again, it's this sort of thing, oh, no, forget about that. Just deliver what you're qualified and what you're really good at, and that's exercise. So if you can increase somebody's like 20-minute walk outside a day, that'll be better for their mental health than you pretending you've just read a lifestyle book and going, hey, John, what about shut the fuck up and just do your job? And your job is making people move better, feel better, and they will make the right choices and it will improve their mental health. Not you've just read a 20-page article on fucking entrepreneurism and that sort of stuff. But I'm going to stop there before I get on too much. Do you know what I mean?
This is brilliant, lads, right? I could talk this all day long.
Yeah.
Do you know what? You said it, Nick, the other day, didn't you? There's that swing in the industry that's probably took us back 15 years when we're concentrating now on movement patterns, health, overall health. And what I mean by that is physical, mental health, and so on. And that's been forced onto people by this situation. But like, if you've been proactive about this and kind of been proactive in a way of letting people see that you're a leader in adapting to this situation and really pushing it out there and throwing it out there on social media and having no shame to do that, it's them coaches and them PTs that are going to reap the rewards when people are going to be back in the gyms and so on. So 100%. Right, let's unpack all of this because it's been an unbelievable chat, to be fair. So I've got loads of stuff kind of wrote down here, and just to summarize to help the guys kind of unpack it slightly. And I think understanding from an effective programming point of view, understanding the movement patterns is key. And I think we've all batted about their movement patterns, building a bit of a movement vocabulary for them patterns, but not overcomplicating that. So thinking about, Andy, I think you said regards to the press up, a progression and a regression, and that's the start of your movement vocab. And then right now, videoing that and getting that out there and supporting your clients with it. So they've got them added variations and so on. Always searching for quality first, but meeting the client where they're at on that day. I thought that was really key, what you discussed. Yeah. And just going back to our conversation 2 weeks ago, Mark, is when we are programming now, when we're building that movement library and understanding the movement patterns, when we're programming and prescribing it to people, like having them 5 whys behind it, like I'm doing this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason, and that's my evidence. I don't care about fucking science right now. I know what works for my system and for me and for my clients. And I thought have them movement standards was a really good kind of point to kind of follow. This has been unreal for the coaches that watch this. There'll be tons of coaches that watch this back, Andy. We've been doing this now for 4 or 5 weeks, and they know it's on at 11. We record it and we throw it into the group at a later time. They start commenting and so on. And we'll add you into the group as well if you want to kind of see them being and around PTs. This has been absolutely unreal. Mark, thank you so much for setting this up with Andy. And obviously it's been great to meet you.
My pleasure.
I'm just going to go around the table. Anything you want to kind of finish on, Mark, and give the guys any advice?
For me, sort of as succinctly as I can put it, having observed personal trainers now for 15 years, whether I've been working competitively against them or in more the second half of my career where I've been teaching them, trying to make them better, there seems to be this like an overarching fear of just doing things simply and doing them well. Because you get, it's very easy to get into like dick measuring, and if so-and-so's got his client doing that over there, I need to show that I've got a bigger dick over here because that's what everyone's interested in. And I get that you have to kind of try and stand out sometimes, but in this environment right now, where although that's amplified on some levels because social media means we can go into everyone's front rooms, however, we're not in the same competitive environment, in like the same building as that same PT that we're competing against. So you can, it's such a good opportunity to drop that fear of doing all the flashy stuff, all the bells and whistles, get so fucking good at the basics, and there's nobody that won't improve if you make them better at all of the basics. And then if you develop that understanding, as myself and Andy and other guys have talked about just how to then add different layers and layers and layers just to alleviate boredom. And as someone hits one standard, you can push them up to the next standard and then the next one and the next one. So yes, it's all well and good having all of these tricks up your sleeve, but honestly, you can just get away with so much by just being really, really good at simple basics. You just don't be scared of playing it simple.
Brilliant. Andy, anything you want to leave it on for the guys? Any additional messages, mate?
That's how I get results. Is the basics. Like genuinely, like if you looked at my program and it starts simple and it just progresses on, because I think that I'm just confident that I know that. I mean, well, here's the thing: is in my local area, I'm the guy that you see last. And what I mean by that is, people come and see me because they've seen 3 PTs, a physio and an osteopath, and their heads just went, poof. And I just look at them and I assess them through a very, very movement 6. And I say, that's what we need to do. And it's like, what, that? And I go, yeah, if you do that one thing and you do it well, then we'll build on the next thing. And when people do that, because you've literally removed all the crap, because if you think about it, you've got an iPhone with about 20 million apps and you don't even use half of them. You're bombarded left, right and center every time. Our job is to make the complex very, very simple. And that's what I do every single time. And that's where I beat people all the time, because I'm confident enough that when I put up a training program, it's like, shit, that's simple. And I go, yeah, and it's going to be effective. And that's it. The other thing is this thing about like people pay for implementation. They don't pay for information, right? And that's a big, big reality, because I can go on Google right now and I can get a body weight plan. I can get anything I want. I can get a diet plan. I can get what I'm, but people will always, always pay for implementation. Do you know what I mean? There might be somebody who's actually clever enough to go and do that and do it, but most people don't take action. Most people just need a prod, right? So people always come back to you, the coach, for you to actually implement whichever level they're at. And that's one of my sort of like things is I give all my clients all my knowledge, all my information, because I know they'll always come back. And we need to remove that fear and just think you're going to have a client for like longer than a year or 2 years, maybe even 3 if you do your job well. And if you can do that by delivering the basics and lay it on, man, you'll fly, you'll crush it. And then the last sort of like point is start really understanding and being happy and being competent and making people healthy, move better and feel better. I'm not the 6-pack guy. When people come to me and they say, I want to get shredded, I go and see that clone there, because but you'll see me in about 24 weeks time when you're broken. And people always come back. I still get results and I still get people lean, but lean enough that they're happy with themselves, and not lean enough too lean that they have captured it for one day and it's fucked their life up for the rest of it. And that comes back down to genuine health and well-being. If you can do that and you can be quite happy with that, you'll be in the industry in the next 10 years. But if you want to get people ripped and looking great in underpants, I'm going to crush you. Simple as that.
Brilliant, mate. Nick,
and just on that slide, there's one other thing I've scrolled down on my notes is, and I've talked about this with your guys at Body Power before, is just the notion of understanding a job role between an instructor, a trainer, and a coach. And at the minute, in the current climate, the instructors are the people who pulling their tops up, saying, "Look at me, I've got a six-pack. If you do what I do, you'll look how I look." They're fucked. They're soon to be obsolete. In the middle, you've got trainers. Trainers just say, "Do this, do that. I need another magic core exercise. I'll Google it and do that." Trainers are shitting themselves at the minute because they're on a knife edge. A lot of personal trainers will disappear out of the industry and never come back. Some for good, some for bad. There'll be good people in there that are just inexperienced, who unfortunately don't have enough momentum to get through this time. Yeah. But if you see yourself as a coach, what a coach does is teaches people the hows and whys, empowers them and educates them to understand why they're doing what they're doing, understands that there's no blanket rule that what works for one person one time doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for every person every time. And I have to be able to adapt that every day. If they're in a bad mood, if they're stressed, if they're knackered, if they're injured. And if I've got this set of principles in place with some very methodical structure to it, it's just all set out for good reason, meet the person where they're at and then just push them along, get them to one level, then push them to the next level. And if all the while I can teach them to understand why they're doing what they're doing and how that ties in with physical, mental, emotional, hormonal health and well-being, then I've got a career for life, as Andy said. And at the minute, the coaches are making a more successful now than ever, and they're certainly not shitting themselves. My clients, I've lost 2 and gained 5 or something like that, so I'm up. The trainers on a knife edge, the instructors hopefully are on their way out. Does that kind of make a bit of sense?
Yeah, I said this the other day. I think I put it on an Instagram post, and this I think on the flip side of that, there's a level of timeline of experience there that you come into the industry and some people will train people and they'll dictate methods at people and so on because they don't know anymore. And then as you get more experience, you become a bit more of a mentor where you suggest things and you have a bigger movement vocab, you understand principles and methods and so on. And then you become a coach after probably all of that experience. And then you can lead your clients to be able to create autonomy for themselves, be able to correct themselves, all that type of stuff. There is a timeline there, I think. And you're right, there's some wankers that we're in this industry for the wrong reasons and will have struggled at this moment in time. I've seen it myself in some cases on the group where they've struggled because they're very trainer-centered and not client-centered, and that's now they've become unstuck. But there is that, and this is why we've gone so heavy with the education and support on the group, because there is that group of PTs right now that are just inexperienced. They haven't found who they are as a person or a business or a coach yet, and it's them who are struggling. And hopefully all of this, what you get in time is supporting you with that. But I completely get that, mate. 100% on board with it.
And it's also important for people to not fall into the trap of thinking just because you call yourself a coach doesn't mean you're a coach. You have to actually, like you see these people. There's a guy near me who's a gym owner. On Instagram, it says he's a public figure with about 203 followers. So, like, just because you call yourself something doesn't mean you actually are that. So it doesn't matter what you call yourself. You just have to, it's just the principle of how you operate, think from a coaching perspective rather than just a training perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we could go into that on another one, bloody hell. There's so much for you two.
Anthony, what I can do is, like, if you want, I can expand on that sweat, groove and move at another time, because
brilliant.
I think it'd be quite handy for coaches to know, because
that's like developing systems, isn't it? It's developing systems that you know from your experience and from the results that you have with clients. And Mark, you've delivered something like this similar to in the past where, I think that would be great to get you both back on. That would be class if you can.
Not going anywhere.
Oh, you fucking brilliant. That's brilliant, boys. Nick, anything to end it on?
No, I mean, just probably my favourite one.
Big time.
Find it hard to top it now. We've been talking business and social media, and for I think over 100 hours. I think
online training.
over the last few weeks. So this is our bread and butter, what we love. So it's been great. And a few more stories about when you trained with Klokov as well. That would be good.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Fucking hell, mate. I tell you what, talk about like being not mobile. Do you know what I mean? I was strong but not mobile, and left there mobile because there was a Greco-Russian wrestler who was the massage guy, and I very quickly found the word Russian fucking for stop. He was horrendous. He literally used to pick me up off the bed with his fingers and just drop me back down again. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right, boys, let's get another date in very, very soon, because this is...
Yeah, not a problem, mate. See you in a few weeks.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks out with you.